The courtroom sat frozen in a suffocating silence. Judge Thompson's gavel crashed against the wooden block with finality, the sound echoing like thunder through the stunned chamber. Detective James Sullivan, a highly decorated veteran with over 2 decades of distinguished service and 3 combat tours behind him, stared blankly ahead as the word guilty shattered his world. His weathered hands, now bound in cold steel, rested motionless on the defense table. The same hands that had earned him 2 Purple Hearts in Afghanistan, saved countless lives on the force, and gentled his beloved K-9 partner Scout through years of service, now symbolized his fall from grace. 22 years of exemplary police. Work, commendations, and sacrifice had crumbled under the weight of fabricated evidence and calculated lies. The gallery behind him buzzed with whispers, their judgment heavy in the air. Fellow officers, who had once called him brother, now averted their eyes, their badges gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights as if mocking his disgrace. Only Scout, his loyal Belgian Malinois partner, maintained unwavering faith. The dog sat alert in the back of the courtroom, dark eyes fixed intently on Sullivan, whining softly as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Chen stood at the prosecution table, shuffling papers with trembling hands. That betrayed her outward confidence. The case against Sullivan had seemed airtight. Evidence of drug trafficking, accepting bribes, and betraying his oath. But something in her eyes suggested unease, a flicker of doubt she couldn't quite suppress. Sullivan's mind raced through the events that had led to this moment. The anonymous tip about drug money in his garage, the perfectly planted evidence, the convenient witness testimonies that aligned too neatly. He had known something was wrong from the start, but the web had been woven too intricately around him. His military background and sterling reputation had made him the perfect fall guy. Who would suspect the decorated veteran of such corruption? Judge Thompson cleared his throat, his lined face stern as he prepared to deliver the sentence. Detective James Sullivan, you stand convicted of serious crimes against the very community you swore to protect. Your betrayal of the badge and abuse of public trust demands severe consequences. Sullivan's throat constricted as he thought of Scout. His faithful partner of 6 years would be reassigned, their bond severed by steel bars and concrete walls. The thought of never again feeling Scout's warm presence beside him during long nights on patrol, never seeing those intelligent eyes looking to him for direction, cut deeper than any prison sentence could. At the back of the courtroom, Scout's whines grew more insistent. The dog's handler struggled to maintain control as Scout pulled against his leash, trying to reach his partner. The display of loyalty drew disapproving glances from the gallery, but Sullivan found strength in it. Scout had always known truth from lies. It was what made him an exceptional police dog. His partner's unwavering faith meant more than any testimony or evidence could. Your Honor. Sullivan's voice cracked as he rose slowly to his feet, his chains rattling in the silence. Before you pass sentence, I have one request. He paused, gathering his composure. Please, let me say goodbye to Scout. The request hung heavy in the air. Judge Thompson's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly as he studied the fallen detective. Perhaps he saw something in Sullivan's bearing, the straight spine of a soldier, the dignity that decades of service had ingrained, or simply the raw honesty in his plea. Through the tense silence, Scout's whines echoed off the wood-paneled walls. The dog's distress seemed to touch something in the judge, who had served in the military himself. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. 5 minutes, Detective. Officer Martinez, please bring the K-9 forward. As Scout was led toward him, Sullivan felt tears burning behind his eyes. The dog's powerful frame trembled with emotion as he approached, tail low but wagging slightly at the sight of his partner. When Scout reached him, Sullivan dropped too, his knees ignoring the bite of cold handcuffs against his wrists. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, burying his face in Scout's fur. The familiar scent of his partner, a mix of leather collar, department-issued shampoo, and something uniquely Scout, broke something inside him. "I'm so sorry, I let you down. I won't be there to watch your back anymore." Scout pressed closer, whimpering softly as he nuzzled against Sullivan's chest. The dog's powerful body quivered with emotion, his training forgotten in the face of his partner's distress. But suddenly, Scout's demeanor changed. His body stiffened, nose working frantically against Sullivan's suit jacket. The change was subtle at first, but Sullivan recognized it immediately. This was Scout's alert behavior, the signal that he had detected something significant. The dog's nose zeroed in on Sullivan's breast pocket, his whimpers turning to sharp, insistent barks that echoed through the courtroom. The gallery stirred uneasily as Scout's barking grew more urgent, his entire body rigid with purpose. Officer Martinez moved to pull him back, but Scout held his ground, years of training evident in his unwavering focus. Judge Thompson leaned forward, his interest piqued. "What's going on with the dog?" The question carried an edge of authority that demanded answers. Assistant DA Chen's face had gone pale, her earlier unease blooming into visible anxiety. She stepped forward quickly, her voice tight. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We should proceed with sentencing." But Scout's barking drowned out her protests. Sullivan felt his heart beginning to race as Officer Martinez approached cautiously, hands moving toward his jacket pocket. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the officer's fingers closed around something solid hidden within the fabric. With a metallic clatter, a small device fell to the floor. It skittered across the polished wood, coming to rest in the center of the courtroom like a gauntlet thrown down before justice itself. In the sudden silence, even Scout's barking ceased, though the dog remained alert, his eyes fixed on the object that could change everything. It was a miniature recording device, its sleek surface catching the light. Assistant DA Chen's sharp intake of breath was audible in the stillness, her composure cracking visibly as she stared at the device. Sullivan felt a surge of hope so powerful it nearly knocked him over. Scout had found something that someone had planted on him, perhaps during his transfer from holding, something that could contain the truth. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Judge Thompson's gavel crashed down again. "Silence," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. His eyes locked onto the small device, then shifted to Sullivan, to Scout, and finally to the visibly shaken prosecutor. "Officer Williams, secure that device. This court is now in recess pending examination of this new evidence." As Sullivan was led away, he looked back at Scout, still standing proud and alert where they had embraced. In his partner's unflinching loyalty, he had found not just comfort, but perhaps the key to his salvation. Whatever was on that recording device, Scout had once again proved that the bond between a K9 and his handler went far deeper than anyone could understand. The guards escorted him back to holding, but for the first time since his nightmare began, Sullivan felt something other than despair. Scout had given him something precious, hope, and hope, he had learned in both war and peace, could be the strongest weapon of all. In the stark confines of his holding cell, Detective James Sullivan sat on the hard metal bench, his mind replaying every moment with Scout over their 6 years together. The first time he'd met the Belgian Malinois at the K9 training facility, the pup had stood out among dozens of candidates. While other dogs barked and paced, Scout had watched him with intelligent, calculating eyes, assessing Sullivan just as much as Sullivan was evaluating him. Their initial training sessions had been challenging but rewarding. Scout's military lineage showed in his disciplined approach to every task, his unwavering focus matching Sullivan's own combat-honed intensity. They had clicked immediately, two warriors who understood the weight of responsibility and the importance of trust in the field. Sullivan's hands clenched as he remembered their first major breakthrough case, a child abduction that had left the department scrambling. When other leads went cold, Scout had tracked the girl's scent through 3 miles of dense forest, fighting exhaustion and rough terrain. They'd found her cold and scared, but alive, huddled in an abandoned cabin. The sight of Scout gently approaching, her, all his fierce protection melting into gentle comfort, had brought tears to Sullivan's eyes. Through countless night shifts, drug busts, and high-risk operations, Scout had become more than a partner. He was Sullivan's shadow, his guardian, his closest friend. The dog seemed to sense Sullivan's moods before even he did, offering silent support during the nights when war memories crept too close, or quiet celebration after successful missions. The sound of footsteps echoing down the corridor pulled Sullivan from his memories. Officer Sarah Martinez appeared at his cell, her expression troubled. She'd been one of the few officers who had shown him kindness during this ordeal, perhaps because she'd worked with him and Scout on several cases. "The recording device is being analyzed," she said quietly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure they weren't overheard. "Scout's still at the K9 facility. He's refusing to work with other handlers, keeps watching the door like he's waiting for you." Sullivan's throat tightened. Scout's loyalty was both a comfort and a fresh source of pain. "He's a one-handler dog," he managed. "Always has been. Remember that hostage situation at First National? He wouldn't even take commands from SWAT until I gave him the signal." Martinez nodded, a faint smile crossing her face at the memory. That day had proven crucial in building trust between K9 units and SWAT teams. Scout's precision in neutralizing the threat without endangering hostages had become a training example for the entire department. "Something's not right about this whole case," Martinez continued, her voice dropping even lower. "The evidence appeared too perfectly, the witness statements aligned too neatly, and now this recording device shows up." She hesitated. "I've been doing some digging. There have been other cases, other decorated officers suddenly facing charges, their careers destroyed, but none as high profile as yours." Sullivan leaned forward, his military instincts firing. "You think there's a pattern?" "I think," Martinez chose her words carefully, "that someone wanted you out of the way. Your combat experience, your record with Scout, your involvement in sensitive cases. You were becoming too effective, too dangerous to someone's operation." The pieces started falling into place in Sullivan's mind. The drug money had appeared in his garage the day after he and Scout had intercepted a major shipment, their largest bust yet. The witness, who claimed to have seen him taking bribes, had surfaced right when Internal Affairs was closing in on corruption in the narcotics division. "Scout found something today," Sullivan said, his voice hardening with determination. "That recording device wasn't just planted on me. It was meant to be found. Someone's playing a bigger game." Martinez nodded grimly. "Which is why I'm here. Judge Thompson ordered Scout to be brought to the evidence lab. They think his detection skills might help uncover more than just what's on that recording. But he's refusing to work. The K9 trainers say they've never seen him like this." Sullivan closed his eyes, picturing his partner's stubborn loyalty. Scout had been bred and trained for military operations before being redirected to police work. His intelligence made him exceptional at his job, but it also meant he formed deep, unshakable bonds. Breaking those bonds could break the dog's spirit. "He needs to know I'm okay," Sullivan said finally. "Scout's not just being difficult, he's protecting our partnership. It's what he was trained to do, what we've done for each other countless times." A memory flashed through his mind. A shootout that had gone bad 6 months ago. Scout had taken down an armed suspect who had Sullivan in his sights, then stayed by his partner's side through a long night of guard duty, refusing to leave even when his shift ended. That same loyalty now had him standing watch at the K9 facility, waiting for his partner to return. Martinez glanced at her watch, then down the corridor. "I might be able to arrange something. Judge Thompson wants that recording analyzed quickly, and Scout's nose could be crucial. If I can convince them that you need to be present for him to work effectively." Sullivan felt a surge of gratitude toward his fellow officer. "Thank you," he said simply, knowing she was risking her career by helping him. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, straightening her uniform. "This goes deeper than any of us suspected. Whatever Scout found today, whoever planted that device, they're not going to give up easily. Be ready." As Martinez's footsteps faded away, Sullivan returned to his memories of Scout. Every training session, every patrol, every moment of trust built between them had led to this. His partner's keen senses and unwavering loyalty might have uncovered the first thread that could unravel the conspiracy against him, but it had also painted a target on both of their backs. In the silence of his cell, Sullivan made a silent promise to his K9 partner. Whatever came next, whatever truth that recording device held, he would protect Scout just as Scout had protected him. Their bond had been forged in service, tested in combat, and now it might be the key to exposing a truth someone had worked very hard to bury. The distant sound of a dog barking echoed through the building, not Scout's voice, but it reminded Sullivan of all they had to fight for: his freedom, his reputation, and most importantly, the partnership that had become the cornerstone of both their lives. Whatever game was being played, whoever had orchestrated his downfall, they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated the bond between a handler and his K9. The evidence lab hummed with tension as Sullivan was led inside, his hands still cuffed, but now in front of him at Judge Thompson's discretion. Scout's alert barking could be heard from down the hall, growing more intense as he caught his partner's scent. The K9 facility supervisor, Dr. Rachel Chen, stood with her arms crossed, observing Scout's behavior with professional interest. "He's been like this since the courtroom," she explained, gesturing to the agitated dog. "Refuses to focus on detection work, won't respond to standard commands from other handlers. 20 years working with police dogs, and I've never seen this level of dedication." As Sullivan entered the secure room, Scout's barking transformed into high-pitched whines of recognition. The dog strained against his lead, his whole body trembling with barely contained energy. Officer Martinez, who had advocated for this unusual arrangement, stood ready with the recording device sealed in an evidence bag. "Detective Sullivan," Judge Thompson's voice carried authority as he addressed the room. "You understand the conditions of this arrangement. You are to assist in having the K9 examine this device and any other evidence he might detect. Any attempt to compromise the investigation will result in immediate return to holding and additional charges." Sullivan nodded solemnly, his eyes fixed on Scout. "I understand, Your Honor. Scout's training is specific. He'll work best if I can give him the commands he knows." The judge gestured to Martinez, who carefully approached with Scout. The moment the dog reached Sullivan, his entire demeanor shifted. The anxiety melted away, replaced by the focused intensity that had made him legendary in the K9 unit. This was the Scout that Sullivan knew. Professional, precise, ready for work. "All right, buddy," Sullivan said softly, his voice carrying the familiar command tone they'd practiced countless times. "Show me what you found." Scout's nose went immediately to the evidence bag containing the recording device, but instead of alerting, he turned his head toward a stack of files on a nearby desk. His body language changed, becoming more rigid, more insistent. Sullivan recognized the shift. Scout had found something else. "He's picking up another scent," Sullivan explained, following his partner's lead. "Something connected to the device." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her scientific curiosity piqued. "The files. He's indicating our background documents from your case. They were brought in for reference while examining the recording. Martinez moved to the desk, carefully spreading out the files under the watchful eyes of the judge and two evidence technicians. Scout's nose worked methodically across the papers, his training showing in every precise movement. Suddenly he froze, letting out a sharp bark that echoed off the lab's sterile walls. "There!" Sullivan said, pointing with his cuffed hands. "That's his final alert. Something in that file matches what he detected on me." Martinez carefully opened the indicated folder, her eyes widening as she examined its contents. "These are the original witness statements," she said slowly. "But there's something odd about the paper." One of the evidence technicians stepped forward with a UV light, passing it over the documents. Under the purple glow, a pattern emerged. Tiny marks, nearly invisible to the naked eye, created a grid across the pages. "Microdots," the technician breathed, his professional detachment cracking. "This is high-level surveillance technology. These documents have been marked for tracking." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Scout sat alertly by Sullivan's side, his mission accomplished, but his body still tense. Dr. Chen was the first to speak, her voice carrying years of professional authority. "The dog wasn't just alerting to a scent," she said, looking at Scout with new respect. "He was detecting the chemical composition of the tracking markers. It's the same substance he found on Detective Sullivan's jacket. Someone has been monitoring every piece of evidence in this case." Judge Thompson's face darkened as he examined the documents. This level of surveillance suggests involvement far beyond a simple frame-up. Who would have access to this technology? "Military grade," Sullivan said quietly, his combat experience surfacing. "I saw similar tracking systems during my last tour, but they were strictly controlled, used only for high-level intelligence operations." Martinez looked up from the files, her face pale. "Sir, if this technology is present on these documents, then every piece of evidence used to convict Detective Sullivan has been compromised," the judge finished grimly. "The entire chain of custody is suspect." Scout shifted his weight, pressing against Sullivan's leg in a gesture of solidarity. The dog's intuition had unraveled the first thread of what was proving to be an elaborate conspiracy. But as Sullivan looked around the room at the stunned faces of his colleagues, he realized they had stumbled onto something far more dangerous than a simple case of evidence tampering. The evidence technician was carefully photographing the microdots. When Scout's head suddenly snapped toward the door, a low growl rumbled in his chest, not his alert sound, but the warning he reserved for serious threats. Sullivan recognized the change instantly. "Someone's coming," he said sharply, just as the lab's power went out, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lights kicked in, casting the room in an eerie red glow. Scout's growl deepened as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, multiple sets moving with military precision. Through the lab's windows, Sullivan caught glimpses of dark figures moving in formation. "Get down!" he shouted, his combat instincts taking over as the first shots shattered the lab's windows. Glass rained down as everyone dove for cover. Scout stayed by Sullivan's side, his training holding despite the chaos. In the red-tinted darkness, Sullivan's mind raced. The time between his Officer of the Year commendation and his arrest, the perfect placement of evidence, the military-grade surveillance. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to destroy him, and now they were moving to ensure their operation remained hidden as bullets continued to fly and Scout pressed against him in the darkness. Sullivan realized that his faithful partner hadn't just found evidence of his innocence. He had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and beyond. The question now wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about surviving long enough to expose the truth. The evidence lab had become a war zone. Sullivan's military training kicked in as he assessed their situation. 2 exits, both likely covered by the attackers, limited cover provided by steel lab tables and concrete support columns. Scout remained steady beside him, the dog's combat, lineage showing in his focused alertness despite the gunfire. "Martinez," Sullivan called out, spotting her behind an overturned file cabinet. "Your radio! We need backup!" She shook her head grimly, holding up her crushed radio. "They're jamming communications. Cell signals are dead too. This is a professional hit." Judge Thompson had taken cover behind a heavy evidence storage unit, his judicial composure replaced by grim determination. "Detective Sullivan," he said, voice cutting through the chaos, "I'm starting to believe your claims of a frame-up." A fresh burst of gunfire peppered the lab's entrance, keeping them pinned down. The evidence technician clutched the folder containing the marked documents, his hands shaking but his grip firm. Dr. Chen had managed to reach a computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The lab's security system is still online," she announced, "running on a separate power grid. I can access the building's layout from here." Sullivan's mind raced through combat scenarios. The attacker's precision suggested military or advanced tactical training. Their goal would be to eliminate witnesses and destroy evidence, particularly the recording device and the documents Scout had identified. "How many?" Martinez asked, her service weapon ready. Sullivan listened to the pattern of footsteps, remembering similar operations from his combat days. "At least 6, moving in tactical formation. They're well-equipped, sound-suppressed weapons. Night vision, probably." Scout's ears suddenly pricked forward, his body tensing. Without warning, he lunged toward a ventilation grate in the far wall, barking sharply. Sullivan recognized the alert. His partner had detected an immediate threat. "Gas!" he shouted, just as white smoke began seeping through the vents. "They're trying to flush us out!" Dr. Chen's fingers flew faster across the keyboard. "The lab has emergency protocols. I can seal the vents, but we'll be trapped in here with limited air." "Do it," Judge Thompson ordered. "Better than being gassed." Out into their crosshairs. The mechanical whir of closing vents provided momentary relief, but Sullivan knew they were running out of options. The attackers would have planned for this. They'd either breach with force or wait them out. Either way, time wasn't on their side. Scout paced anxiously between Sullivan and the evidence table where the recording device lay. His behavior caught Sullivan's attention. It wasn't fear, but the same intense focus he showed during detection work. The dog was trying to tell him something. "Dr. Chen," Sullivan called out, "what's directly below this lab?" She pulled up the building schematics. "Old evidence storage. It was decommissioned last year when they built the new facility. There's a maintenance shaft that leads down," Sullivan finished. "They're expecting us to go up or out. Standard. Tactical approaches to control upper levels and exits." He turned to Martinez. "Remember that drug bust last spring? The one where Scout found the hidden tunnel?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "He can lead us through the maintenance shaft, but the others..." Sullivan looked at Judge Thompson and the evidence technician. Neither had tactical training, and the shaft would be tight. But staying meant certain death, and they needed to protect both the recording device and the marked documents. "Your Honor," Sullivan said, "what we found here, the surveillance, the military-grade tech, this goes beyond a corrupt officer or even department conspiracy. Someone powerful wants this buried, along with everyone who knows about it." The judge's face hardened with resolve. "Then we make sure they fail, Detective. What's your plan?" Before Sullivan could respond, Scout's head snapped toward the main door. His growl deepened, multiple threats moving closer. They were out of time. "Martinez, you take point. Scout will guide you to the shaft access. Dr. Chen, can you trigger any other emergency protocols? We need coverage." She nodded, typing rapidly. "Fire suppression system. It'll flood the lab with foam. Buy you maybe 30 seconds of visual cover. Judge, stay between Martinez and the technician. I'll take rear guard with Scout." Sullivan's hands were still cuffed, but years of combat had taught him to adapt. Everyone grab what evidence you can carry. Nothing gets left behind for them to destroy. The sound of breaching charges being set forced them into action. Martinez helped Dr. Chen gather the crucial files, while the technicians secured the recording device. Judge Thompson, showing remarkable composure, retrieved a backup drive from the computer. Scout led them to a section of wall paneling pawing at its base. Martinez found the hidden latch, revealing the narrow maintenance shaft. The sound of final breach preparations echoed from the hallway. "Dr. Chen," Sullivan said quietly. "Hit it." She pressed a final key before hurrying to the shaft. White foam began spraying from ceiling nozzles just as the breaching charge detonated. The lab door exploded inward as figures in tactical gear burst through the smoke. "Go!" Sullivan ordered, pushing the others toward the shaft. Scout stayed by his side, matching his movements as they provided cover. Years of partnership made them synchronized, man and dog, guardian and protector. The attackers' night vision would be useless in the foam. Sullivan heard their frustrated shouts as visibility dropped to 0, but they'd recover quickly, and their superior numbers would soon overwhelm any advantage. Martinez helped the others into the shaft, while Sullivan and Scout held position. The dog's presence steadied him, just as it had during countless dangerous operations. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The foam was beginning to dissipate. Sullivan caught glimpses of laser sights cutting through the chaos. Time had run out. "Scout, go!" he commanded, pointing to the shaft. For once, his faithful partner hesitated, unwilling to leave him behind. A bullet whizzed past too close. Sullivan grabbed Scout's collar, pushing him toward safety. "Go, boy, protect them, find the truth." With a soft whine, Scout finally obeyed, disappearing into the shaft. Sullivan took one last look at his partner before following, pulling the panel closed behind him just as gunfire erupted where he'd been standing. The maintenance shaft was a tight fit, forcing them to move single file through the darkness. Scout led the way, his keen senses navigating them through the maze of metal and concrete. Martinez followed close behind, then Judge Thompson and the evidence technician, with Dr. Chen and Sullivan bringing up the rear. Above them, the sounds of the tactical team's fury echoed through the ventilation system. Orders were being barked, positions coordinated. They knew their targets had escaped, and Sullivan could hear them beginning to sweep the building's maintenance access points. "How far to the old evidence storage?" Sullivan whispered ahead to Martinez, his cuffed hands making it difficult to maneuver through the narrow space. "2 levels down," she replied softly. "Scout seems to know where he's going. He's following the air current." The dog's military training was proving invaluable. Scout had been bred and trained for special operations before being redirected to police work, and his ability to navigate confined spaces under stress was part of that legacy. Each turn he took was deliberate, each pause calculated. Dr. Chen worked on her tablet as they moved, the device's dim glow casting eerie shadows. "I'm pulling up the building's original blueprints," she murmured. "The old evidence storage has a connection to the underground parking structure. If we can reach it, they'll have that covered too," Sullivan interrupted. "These aren't amateurs. The parking structure would be their first containment point." The evidence technician clutched the folder and recording device closer. "Who are these people? This level of operation, the resources involved?" "Military contractors," Sullivan said grimly, memories of his combat tours surfacing. "I've seen operations like this before, but never on domestic soil. The precision, the equipment, the tactics, this is a private military company's work." Judge Thompson's voice carried quiet authority, even in whispers. "The question is, who has the influence to deploy such forces against a police department, and why go to these lengths over a framed officer?" Before Sullivan could respond, Scout froze. His body went rigid, ears forward. Everyone held their breath, understanding the warning. Above them, boots thundered on metal. The tactical team had entered the maintenance system. They're sweeping every shaft, Martinez whispered. Standard search pattern. They'll find us within minutes. Sullivan's mind raced. They needed a diversion, something to throw off the search pattern. His eyes fell on Dr. Chen's tablet, then moved to the pipes running alongside their shaft. Years of combat experience merged. With his knowledge of the building systems, Dr. Chen, he whispered urgently, can you still access the building's maintenance controls? She nodded, fingers moving across the screen. Basic systems only. What are you thinking? The steam pipes. For the building's heating run through these shafts. If we can trigger an emergency release, understanding dawned in her eyes, create multiple heat signatures, confuse their thermal imaging. The sound of boots grew closer. Scout's muscles tensed, ready to move on command. Sullivan knew they had seconds to act. Do it, he ordered. Dr. Chen's fingers flew across the tablet. Suddenly the pipes around them groaned. Steam began hissing from multiple junctions, filling the shaft system with heat and vapor. Above them, the search team's coordinated movements turned chaotic. They're splitting up, Martinez reported, listening to the confusion. The heat signatures are working. They can't tell which is us. Sullivan knew it wouldn't fool them for long. Scout, find us a way down, quick and quiet. The dog moved with renewed purpose, leading them through a series of turns that descended deeper into the building's infrastructure. The steam provided cover, but it also made the shaft system dangerously hot. Sweat poured down their faces as they crawled through the increasingly narrow spaces. After what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, Scout led them to a larger junction. Multiple shafts converged here, creating a small maintenance hub. The dog's nose worked the air currents, seeking their best escape route. Wait, Dr. Chen said suddenly, studying her tablet. This junction, it's not on the original blueprints. Sullivan moved closer, examining the shaft configurations. The metal here was newer, the welds more recent. This was added after the original construction, probably during the renovation last year. Martinez's eyes widened. The renovation that happened right after the department's major drug bust, the one where 3 officers disappeared. The pieces started clicking into place in Sullivan's mind. The disappeared officers, the department renovation, his own frame-up, they were all connected. This hidden maintenance hub was part of something bigger. Scout's sudden alertness drew their attention. The dog's nose worked frantically at one of the junction's walls, his behavior indicating he'd found something significant. Sullivan ran his hands over the metal surface, feeling for inconsistencies. There's a seam here, he whispered. Hidden panel, Scout's picking up something behind it. The evidence technician examined the wall with professional interest. These markings, they're similar to the microdots on the documents, some kind of tracking system. Judge Thompson moved closer, his judicial demeanor giving way to intense focus. Can we open it? Sullivan felt along the seam until his fingers caught a subtle depression. Years of working with Scout on search and rescue had taught him to trust his partner's instincts. With careful pressure, the panel clicked and swung outward. Behind it lay a small room, filled with servers and monitoring equipment. Screens displayed, camera feeds from throughout the building, including the now empty evidence lab. But it was the documents pinned to a corkboard that drew their attention. Photographs, reports, and most disturbing of all, detailed surveillance files on multiple officers, including Sullivan. This is a command center, Martinez breathed, taking in the sophisticated equipment. They've been watching everything, everyone. Sullivan's eyes locked onto a familiar face in one of the photographs. Captain Eric Reynolds, his former commanding officer who had testified against him at the trial. In the photo, Reynolds was meeting with men in tactical gear, similar to those hunting them now. The corruption goes higher than we thought, Sullivan said quietly. This isn't just about framing one officer. They've infiltrated the entire department. Scout, whined softly, pressing against Sullivan's leg. The dog understood the gravity of what they'd discovered, evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the heart of law enforcement itself. The sound of boots on metal reminded them of their pursuers. The steam diversion wouldn't hold them off much longer, but now they had something more valuable than the recording device. They had proof of an organized operation using military contractors to corrupt and control the police department. The hidden command center hummed with electronic activity, its screens casting a pale blue glow over the gathered group. Sullivan moved quickly to the main console, his cuffed hands making it awkward but not impossible to examine the system. His years of military intelligence training helped him recognize the setup. This was a professional surveillance operation, far beyond standard police capabilities. "Look at these files," Martinez whispered, scrolling through documents on one of the terminals. Detailed surveillance on over 30 officers, bank records, personal communications, family information. They've been gathering leverage on everyone. In positions of authority, Dr. Chen had connected her tablet to the system, her fingers flying across the screen as she downloaded crucial data. The network architecture is military-grade. Multiple redundancies, encrypted channels, dedicated satellite uplinks. This isn't just local, it's part of a much larger operation. The evidence technician was photographing everything with his phone, paying special attention to the corkboard with its web of connections. These timestamps go back 3 years, right around when the department's major drug seizures started declining. Sullivan studied a map displayed on the central monitor. It showed the city divided into zones, each marked with different colors and annotations. They've carved up the entire jurisdiction. These aren't patrol zones, they're trafficking routes. Judge Thompson's face had grown increasingly grave as he examined the evidence. They've turned the department into their own private security force. Officers who couldn't be bought were framed or eliminated. Like you, Detective Sullivan. Scout suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward the shaft entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest, warning of approaching danger. The tactical team was getting closer, their methodical search pattern bringing them nearer to the hidden room. "We need to move," Sullivan said urgently. "But we have to get this information out first. Dr. Chen, can you transfer the files?" She shook her head in frustration. "The system's locked down tight. I can copy some files, but the core database needs administrative access." Sullivan's eyes fell on a familiar name in one of the documents. Technical Director Marcus Zhang. He remembered Zhang from his last deployment, a civilian contractor who worked with military intelligence. The pieces suddenly clicked together. "Try this," he said, leaning over to type a series of characters. "Standard military backdoor protocol." Zhang always used the same system architecture. The screen flickered, then displayed a command prompt. Dr. Chen's eyes widened as she gained access. "It's working. Downloading everything now." Martinez continued searching through files, her expression growing more troubled. "There's a list. Here, officers marked for removal. Your name was on it, Sullivan, but there are others. Officers who've reported suspicious activity, who've asked too many questions, or who've gotten too close to their operation." Sullivan finished grimly. "How many?" 12 names. 3 are already marked as handled. She paused, her face paling. "Wait, there's a priority target listed for immediate action. Officer Sarah Martinez." The revelation hung heavy in the air. Martinez had been helping Sullivan, investigating inconsistencies in his case. She'd made herself a target without realizing it. Scout's growl deepened, his body language indicating multiple threats approaching. They were running out of time. "Download completed," Dr. Chen announced, disconnecting her tablet. "I've got everything. Personnel files, operation details, financial records." Sullivan studied the room's layout, his tactical mind working through scenarios. "There's another shaft exit," he said, pointing to a maintenance diagram. "Leads to the old evidence storage. but they'll be expecting that. Judge Thompson stepped forward, his voice carrying quiet authority. Then we split up, divide their forces, increase our chances of getting this information out. Sir, with respect, you don't have combat training, Sullivan protested. The judge's eyes hardened with determination. No, but I have 30 years of dealing with criminals who think they're above the law. Dr. Chen and I will take the evidence storage route with the technician. You, Officer Martinez, and Scout take the secondary exit. The dog can cover your trail. Sullivan recognized the logic, even as he hated risking civilian lives. Martinez, your weapon. She understood immediately, handing her backup pistol to the judge. It's loaded. Safety's off. But sir, I qualified marksman during my military service, Thompson said, checking the weapon with practiced ease. Some skills you don't forget. The sound of boots on metal grew closer. Scout pressed against Sullivan's leg, ready to move. 5 minutes, Sullivan said firmly. We go opposite directions. If either group doesn't make it to the rendezvous point, the other continues with the evidence. No waiting, no heroics. This information has to get out. Dr. Chen clutched her tablet, now containing proof of the entire conspiracy. Where's the rendezvous? The old warehouse on River Street, Martinez suggested. It's been abandoned since the drug bust last year. Scout and I used it for training exercises. We know every entry point. Sullivan nodded. The location was good. Multiple escape routes, familiar territory. 5 minutes after separation. If you're not there, we move on to federal authorities. Scout's ears suddenly pricked forward, his muscles tensing. The tactical team had found the junction leading to their hidden room. Time's up, Sullivan whispered. Dr. Chen, judge, technician. Good luck. As the first group disappeared into one shaft, Sullivan turned to Martinez and Scout. Ready to make some noise, partner? Scout's tail wagged once, his body coiled with controlled energy. Even in the midst of danger, the dog's unwavering loyalty steadied Sullivan's nerves. They'll expect us to be quiet, to hide, he said, his military training taking over. So we do the opposite. Full aggression, maximum chaos. Scout knows the attack commands. We give them something to chase while the others get clear. Martinez checked her remaining ammunition. Just like that drug. Den raid last summer? The one where Scout created a diversion? Sullivan allowed himself a grim smile. Exactly. But this time, we're not just distracting street thugs. These are trained killers. You sure you're ready for this? Her eyes met his, showing the same determination. He'd seen in combat veterans. They put my name on their list, made me a target. I'm not running from that. Scout's growl turned into a sharp bark. The tactical team had reached the hidden door. Sullivan heard them preparing breaching charges. On my mark, he whispered, positioning himself by the secondary exit. Scout, ready? The dog's muscles bunched, combat training overriding his usual disciplined silence. They had one chance to create enough chaos for the others to escape with the evidence. One chance to expose a conspiracy that had corrupted the entire department. The breaching charge detonated, and Sullivan gave the command that would unleash hell. Scout, attack! The command center erupted into chaos as Scout launched himself at the first tactical team member through the breach. The dog's military training showed in his precision, not going for a killing bite, but targeting the arm holding the weapon. The attacker's scream echoed through the metal shafts as his rifle clattered to the ground. Sullivan and Martinez moved in perfect sync, taking advantage of the confusion. Despite his cuffed hands, Sullivan's combat experience let him fight effectively. He shoulder-charged the second man through the door, using his body weight to slam the attacker into the metal wall. Martinez's precise strikes disabled a third, her police combat training proving effective, even against military operators. Flash and clear, someone shouted from the shaft. Sullivan recognized the call from his combat days. Down, he yelled, dropping to the floor with Martinez as Scout instinctively took cover. The flashbang grenade detonated, but they were ready for it. Before the tactical team could capitalize, Scout was moving again, creating chaos in the confined space. The dog's barking echoed off the metal walls, making it impossible for the attackers to coordinate effectively. Their night vision gear, already struggling with the steam from earlier, became a liability in the strobing emergency lights of the command center. "Martinez, the server," Sullivan called out, engaging another operator in close combat. His cuffed hands caught the man's rifle, turning it aside as a burst of gunfire peppered the wall. She understood immediately, pulling a flash drive from her pocket. Standard department issue, but now carrying a different mission. As Scout kept the entrance covered, she jammed the drive into the main server, initiating a department backup protocol that would send emergency data to multiple secure locations. "Upload starting," she announced, ducking under a wild swing from an attacker. 2 minutes to completion." Sullivan knew they needed to buy that time. The tactical team was good. Professional military contractors didn't come cheap. But they hadn't expected this level of resistance, especially not from a K-9 unit trained in combat operations. Scout moved like a shadow through the chaos, his attacks precise and devastating. The dog targeted weapons, hands and legs, using his training to maximum effect. Each bite was calculated, each movement coordinated with Sullivan's own actions. "Secure the drives," one of the tactical leaders shouted. "Primary target is the data." "Not happening," Sullivan growled, using his cuffs as an improvised weapon to entangle another attacker's rifle. The man went down hard, and Scout was there instantly, standing guard over him with bared teeth. Martinez typed furiously at the console, protecting the upload while defending herself from attacks. 60 seconds! They're trying to shut down the network. Sullivan saw more shapes moving in the shaft entrance. They were about to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But they didn't need to win. They just needed to hold long enough for the data to get out and the judges' group to escape. "Scout, defense pattern," he commanded. The dog immediately shifted tactics, moving to create a barrier between the attackers and Martinez. His growls reverberated through the space, the sound of a warrior protecting his own. A bullet grazed Sullivan's arm, drawing blood. Another tactical operator had worked his way to an elevated position, trying to get a clear shot. But before he could fire again, Scout was there, leaping with incredible power to drag the man down. 30 seconds, Martinez called out. The upload bar on the screen crept forward agonizingly slowly. Sullivan caught movement in his peripheral vision, someone trying to flank their position. He spun, but his injured arm slowed him. The attacker's boot caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. As the man raised his weapon, Scout appeared like a furry missile, clamping down on the attacker's weapon arm with bone-crushing force. "Clear the room." The tactical team leader's voice carried over the chaos. "Gas them out!" Gas canisters rolled into the space, beginning to spew their disabling contents. Sullivan's military training kicked in. They had seconds before the gas would incapacitate them. "Martinez! Status!" he shouted, fighting to stay focused as the gas began to take effect. "Upload complete," she announced triumphantly, stumbling away from the console. "Data's out, multiple secure locations." Sullivan knew they had to move. The tactical team would be wearing gas masks, giving them a crucial advantage. Already his vision was starting to blur, his lungs burning. "Scout, find exit," he commanded between coughs. The dog's superior senses would be their only guide now. Scout barked once in acknowledgement, then grabbed Martinez's sleeve, pulling her toward their planned escape route. Sullivan followed, trusting his partner's judgment, even as the gas made it harder to think clearly. Behind them, he heard the tactical team regrouping, preparing for a final push. But it didn't matter now. The data was out, evidence of the conspiracy uploaded to secure servers across the department's emergency network. Whatever happened next, the truth would be exposed. They crashed through a maintenance panel into another shaft, Scout leading them away from the gas. Martinez was coughing violently but still moving. Sullivan's military training helped him fight through the effects, but he knew they were all running on borrowed time. They're following, Martinez gasped out, hearing the sounds of pursuit. Sullivan's mind raced through their options. They needed to reach the warehouse rendezvous point, but in their current condition, they were vulnerable. The gas effects would take time to wear off, and the tactical team would be hunting them relentlessly. "Scout," he wheezed. "Alternate route. Find cover." The dog understood, changing direction to lead them through a complex series of turns. Sullivan recognized the strategy. Scout was using his training to break their scent trail, making it harder for their pursuers to track them. Behind them, the sounds of the tactical team grew fainter, though Sullivan knew better than to think. They'd given up. This was just the beginning. They had the evidence now, proof of corruption at the highest levels, but getting it to the right authorities would be another battle entirely. As they moved through the darkness, guided by Scout's unwavering instincts, Sullivan's thoughts turned to Judge Thompson's group. He could only hope they had made it out safely with their portion of the evidence. The conspiracy they had uncovered was bigger than any of them had imagined, reaching into the very heart of law enforcement. Scout led them around another corner, and Sullivan caught the faint scent of fresh air. Somewhere ahead was their exit, and with it, the next phase of their fight for justice. But as his body fought against the lingering effects of the gas, he knew one thing with certainty. They had struck the first real blow against the corruption that had nearly destroyed his life. The war wasn't over, but thanks to his loyal partners, extraordinary abilities and unwavering courage, they had won this battle. The truth was out there now, racing through secure networks to people who could act on it. All they had to do was stay alive long enough to make sure it reached the right hands. Scout led them through a maze of maintenance tunnels, his training allowing him to navigate despite the lingering effects of the gas. The dog's pace was deliberate, choosing routes that would be difficult for their pursuers to follow, while accommodating Sullivan and Martinez's compromised condition. The sound of dripping water echoed through the darkness, mixing with their labored breathing. Sullivan's military instincts told him they were moving deeper into the building's infrastructure, below the main foundation level. The air grew cooler, heavy with the scent of damp concrete and old metal. "We're in the original foundation," Martinez whispered between coughs. "This section predates the renovation, not even on current blueprints." Sullivan nodded, conserving his breath as he fought off the last effects of the gas. Scout had chosen. Well, the old tunnels would make it harder for the tactical team to coordinate their pursuit, but it also meant they were moving further from their planned extraction point. "Any idea where the judge's group might be?" Sullivan managed, his ribs aching from the earlier fight. Martinez shook her head. "If they followed the plan, they should be topside by now, heading for the rendezvous." Scout suddenly stopped, his body going rigid. His ears swiveled forward, catching sounds too faint for human hearing. Sullivan recognized the alert posture. Multiple threats, but not immediate. The dog was warning them of movement above. "They're sweeping the building systematically," Sullivan whispered, his voice steadier now. "Standard search pattern. They'll have teams covering all known exits." "Known being the key word," Martinez replied, pulling out her phone. The screen cast a dim glow in the darkness. "No signal down here, but look at this blueprint I downloaded earlier. These tunnels were part of the original city infrastructure. Some of them connect to the old storm drain system." Sullivan studied the diagram, his tactical mind working through the possibilities. The storm drains could provide an escape route, but they'd be obvious choices for anyone with military training. "Unless, Scout," he said softly, "find the water." The dog's ears perked up at the command, one they'd used during flood rescue training. Without hesitation, Scout turned down a narrow passage, leading them deeper into the maze of tunnels. The sound of running water grew stronger. The city redirected the main storm drains during the renovation, Martinez explained as they moved. "But the old channels still exist. They're not on any current maps because they're supposedly sealed off. Sullivan smiled grimly in the darkness. Perfect hiding place for things you don't want found. Like evidence of department-wide corruption. They emerged into a larger chamber, clearly part of the original drainage system. Ancient pipes lined the walls, most long abandoned, but one still carried a steady flow of water. Scout moved to a heavy metal grate set into the floor, pawing at it insistently. This was an overflow junction, Martinez said, examining the structure. When the water level got too high, it would divert through these secondary channels. They run all the way to the river. Sullivan knelt beside Scout, running his cuffed hands over the grate. Help me with this. Looks like it hasn't been maintained in years. Together, they managed to shift the rusted metal enough to create an opening. The sound of rushing water echoed from below, along with the faint glow of emergency lighting. Evidence that not all of these abandoned tunnels were as forgotten as the blueprints suggested. Scout's head suddenly snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Moments later, they heard it too, voices and footsteps growing closer. "They're following our trail," Sullivan whispered. "We need to move." Martinez hesitated. "The water level." "Scout can handle it," Sullivan assured her. "He's trained for water operations, and right now it's our only option." The voices grew clearer. The tactical team was closing in, their professional training evident in their coordinated movements. Scout pressed against Sullivan's leg, ready to move on command. "I'll go first," Martinez said, drawing her weapon. "Cover our descent in case they catch up." Sullivan nodded, helping her through the opening. The splash of her landing echoed up from below, followed by the sound of steady breathing. The water wasn't too deep. Scout went next, jumping gracefully. Through the gap, just as Sullivan prepared to follow, a beam of light cut through the darkness behind them. The tactical team had reached their position. "Contact!" a voice shouted. "Sub-level 3. Sullivan didn't hesitate. He dropped through the opening just as gunfire erupted above them. The cold water shocked his system as he landed, but Scout was there instantly, helping him find his footing. "Move!" he ordered, pushing Martinez ahead as bullets pinged off the metal walls around them. They splashed through the tunnel, the emergency lights casting weird shadows on the curved walls. Behind them, they could hear the tactical team preparing to follow. But the water would slow them down, make it harder to maintain their professional formation. Scout took point, his powerful body cutting through the knee-deep water with ease. The dog's night vision and keen senses made him the perfect guide through the dark tunnels. Every fork in the path, every junction, he chose without hesitation. "They're splitting up," Martinez called out, hearing the sounds of pursuit diverging above them. "Trying to cut us off." Sullivan's mind raced through their options. The tunnels would eventually lead to the river, but they needed to surface before then. The tactical team would have that exit covered, and swimming the river in their condition wasn't feasible. Scout suddenly veered left, leading them through a partially collapsed section of tunnel. The passage was tight, forcing them to wade sideways. Through the water, behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter. The tactical team would have to find another route around the collapse. "This buys us some time," Sullivan said, helping Martinez through a particularly narrow section. "But we need to find a way up soon. We're too exposed down here." As if in response to his words, Scout barked sharply, his alert for a discovery. The dog was pawing at what looked like a maintenance ladder set into the wall, half hidden behind years of mineral deposits. "Where does it lead?" Martinez asked, examining the rusted rungs. Sullivan studied the tunnel architecture. These were maintenance access points. They'd need ways to reach the drainage system from street level. If we're lucky, it'll come up in an alley or service corridor, Martinez finished, somewhere out of sight. The sounds of pursuit were growing louder again. The tactical team had found an alternate route. They were out of time. "Scout, up!" Sullivan commanded. The dog immediately began climbing the ladder, his training making the awkward ascent look easy. Martinez followed, with Sullivan bringing up the rear despite his cuffed hands. The ladder seemed endless in the dim light, each rung a potential betrayal of rusted metal. But Scout's confident movements above them provided guidance and encouragement. Whatever lay at the top of this escape route, they would face it together. Just as Sullivan's arms began to shake from the strain, Scout's excited whine echoed down from above. They had reached the top. Now they just had to hope that what lay beyond their exit point wouldn't lead them straight into the hands of their pursuers. Scout pushed through the access panel at the top of the ladder, emerging into what appeared to be an abandoned maintenance room. Decades-old equipment lined the walls, covered in dust and cobwebs. Martinez followed, helping Sullivan navigate the final rungs despite his cuffed hands. The room smelled of mildew and disuse, but Scout's alert posture told them they weren't alone. The dog's ears were pricked forward, his body tense but not aggressive. Sullivan recognized the behavior. Scout had detected friendly scents. Detective Sullivan? A familiar voice whispered from the shadows. Judge Thompson stepped into view, accompanied by Dr. Chen and the evidence technician. All three looked exhausted but unharmed. "Your Honor," Sullivan breathed in relief. "You made it out." "The evidence?" The judge patted his jacket pocket. "Safe. Dr. Chen's tablet too. But we've got company upstairs. The whole building is surrounded." Martinez moved to the room's only window, carefully peering through the grimy glass. Tactical teams on every corner. They're not even trying to be subtle anymore. Sullivan joined her at the window, taking in the situation. The maintenance room was in the basement of what appeared to be an old industrial building, several blocks from the police station. The tactical teams had established a perimeter, their professional positioning revealing their military training. "They're not just containing us," Sullivan observed grimly. "They're sending a message. Whoever's behind this isn't worried about being seen anymore." Dr. Chen was working on her tablet, having found a weak signal. "The data we uploaded is spreading through the department's emergency protocols. Too many secure servers for them to contain it all. But..." She paused, her expression troubled. "What is it?" Thompson asked. "The files are being flagged as compromised. Someone with high-level access is trying to discredit the evidence before it can be verified. They're claiming it's all fabricated, part of a conspiracy by corrupt officers to undermine the department." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "They're flipping the narrative, making us look like the criminals." "It gets worse," Martinez added, checking her phone. "APB just went out. We're being labeled as armed and dangerous. They're saying we attacked officers and stole classified documents." Scout moved to Sullivan's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture of solidarity. The dog's presence helped him focus, think past the anger and betrayal. "They'll have emergency response teams mobilizing," he said, drawing from his military experience. "SWAT, FBI tactical units, anyone who might respond to a threat against law enforcement. We need to move before they lock down the entire area." The evidence technician spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. "The recording device and documents we found, they prove the conspiracy. If we can get them to the right people." "The right people might be compromised too," Sullivan cut in. "This goes deeper than we thought. Military contractors, high-level access to police systems, coordination with federal response teams. Whoever's behind this has influence at every level." Judge Thompson's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we go to the media. Multiple outlets, simultaneous releases. Make the evidence public before they can bury it. They'll be watching all the major news stations," Martinez pointed out. "Probably have people inside the local outlets too." Dr. Chen looked up from her tablet. "Not all media. I have a contact. Independent journalist who specializes in police. Corruption stories. She's been investigating department irregularities for months. If we can get the evidence to her." Scout's ears suddenly perked up, his body tensing. Seconds later, they heard it too, the whir of helicopter rotors approaching. "They're bringing in air support," Sullivan said, moving away from the window. "Standard procedure for cornered suspects. They'll start with thermal imaging, then move." To breach teams, the judge checked his borrowed weapon. How long? Minutes, maybe less. Once they have eyes on the building, they'll move fast. Want to end this before it draws more attention. Martinez was studying an old building diagram posted on the wall. These maintenance rooms were connected, part of the original factory system. If we can access the other sections... Scout was already moving, pawing at a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. Sullivan examined the area, finding the outline of a sealed doorway. "Help me with this," he called to the others. Together, they managed to shift decades of accumulated debris, revealing a narrow passage. "It leads to the old boiler room," Martinez said, consulting the diagram. "From there, we might be able to reach the subway maintenance tunnels. They run under this whole district." The sound of rotors grew louder, accompanied by the thud of boots on the floors above. The tactical teams were starting their sweep. "We need to split up again," Sullivan decided. "They're expecting us to stay together, use the evidence as bargaining power. We split the files, take different routes. Makes it harder for them to contain everything." Judge Thompson nodded grimly. "Dr. Chen and I will head for her journalist contact. Martinez, you and the technician take the recording device. Try to reach the FBI field office. Sullivan and Scout will give them something to chase," Sullivan finished. "Draw their attention, buy you time to get the evidence out." The judge clasped his shoulder. "Detective, what you and Scout uncovered, it goes beyond one corrupt department. The people behind this, they're trying to control law enforcement itself. This has to come out." Sullivan looked at his faithful partner, seeing the same determination in Scout's steady gaze. "It will, sir, whatever it takes." The helicopter was directly overhead now, its searchlight beginning to probe the building's lower levels. Time had run out. 5 hours, Sullivan said firmly. "Get the evidence to your contacts. After that, everything goes public. Every server, every news outlet, every social media platform. Let them try to contain that." Scout's sharp bark echoed through the room, a warning that the tactical teams were closing in. The time for planning was over. Now it was about survival, about getting the truth out before those who would bury it could silence them all. As the group prepared to separate, each carrying pieces of evidence that could expose decades of corruption, Sullivan felt a fierce pride in his K9 partner. Scout had not only saved him from a false conviction, but had helped uncover a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of justice. Whatever came next, they would face it together, guardians of a truth too important to die in these dark tunnels. The first breach charge detonated somewhere above them, and the final phase of their fight for justice began. The maintenance tunnels echoed with the sounds of pursuit as Sullivan and Scout led their hunters on a calculated chase. Years of military training and K9 operations had taught them both how to be the perfect distraction, drawing attention while their allies escaped with the crucial evidence. "Clear the east wing!" Voices echoed from above. "They're moving underground." Sullivan smiled grimly in the darkness. The tactical teams were following their trail exactly as planned, focusing their resources on the most obvious threat. Scout moved silently beside him, the dog's powerful muscles coiled and ready. They had worked countless operations together, but never with stakes this high. The tunnel ahead branched into 3 passages. Scout paused, his nose working the air currents. Sullivan recognized his partner's alert posture, multiple threats converging, but not immediate. The tactical teams were still coordinating their response, trying to predict their movement. "Good boy," Sullivan whispered, his cuffed hands resting on Scout's fur. "Make them work for it." Scout led them down the center passage, but not before, leaving clear signs of their presence at each entrance. Let the tactical teams split their forces, waste time checking every route. Every minute they spent chasing shadows was another minute for the others to get the evidence to safety. The passage sloped downward, taking them deeper into the city's underground infrastructure. Old pipes lined the walls, carrying steam and electrical conduits from an earlier era. Sullivan's combat experience told him they were moving parallel to the subway maintenance tunnels, close enough to suggest an escape route, far enough to avoid obvious choke points. Suddenly, Scout froze. His ears swiveled forward, catching something beyond human hearing. Sullivan instantly stilled, trusting his partner's instincts. Moments later, he heard it too. The subtle click of tactical gear, the whisper of movement ahead. They had company. "Alpha team in position," a voice crackled faintly from somewhere ahead. "Charlie team, status." Scout's muscles tensed, ready for action. Sullivan felt his own combat instincts rising, years of special operations training taking over. They were being boxed in, herded toward a prepared position. "Time to change the game, buddy," Sullivan whispered. Scout's tail twitched once in acknowledgement. Together they moved to a section of wall where the pipes clustered thickly. Sullivan's trained eye spotted what others might miss: a maintenance access point, long abandoned but not completely sealed. Scout understood without command, pressing his shoulder against the rusted panel. The metal groaned but gave way, revealing a narrow vertical shaft. The sound would alert their pursuers, but that was part of the plan. Let them think they had forced their quarry into a desperate move. "Movement in Section 4, the call echoed through the tunnels. "They're breaking through." Sullivan helped Scout into the shaft first, then followed despite his cuffed hands making the climb treacherous. Above them, heavy boots thundered on, metal catwalks. The tactical teams were converging on their position, exactly as planned. The shaft seemed to stretch endlessly upward, each rusted rung a test of faith. Sullivan's arms burned from the effort, but Scout's encouraging whine from above kept him moving. The dog had already reached some kind of platform, his silhouette, barely visible in the darkness. Target sighted, a flashlight beam cut through the gloom below. "They're ascending through the utility shaft." Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking off metal around them. Sullivan pressed himself against the shaft wall, making himself as small a target as possible. Scout barked sharply, not his alert bark, but a sound of warning. Something was wrong above them. Sullivan reached the platform, just as another tactical team breached a door at its level. Scout was already moving, his training taking over. The dog launched himself at the first operator through the door, his attack precise and devastating. The man went down hard, his weapon clattering across the platform. Sullivan didn't hesitate. He rolled forward, coming up with the fallen operator's rifle. His cuffed hands made it awkward, but he managed to lay down, suppressing fire, forcing the other team members back through the doorway. "Scout, find us a way out," he commanded, keeping the door covered. His partner immediately began searching the platform, nose working frantically. The radio on the fallen operator crackled to life. "All teams converge on level 3. Box them, and shoot the dog if necessary, but we need Sullivan alive." The word sent a chill through Sullivan's spine. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him captured, probably to stage a convenient suicide once the evidence was contained. Standard procedure for covering up loose ends. Scout's sharp bark drew his attention. The dog had found another maintenance access, this one leading horizontally into darkness. Sullivan could hear the tactical teams approaching from multiple directions. They were running out of options. "Okay, buddy," he said, backing toward the new opening. "Time to disappear." The passage Scout had found was barely large enough for them to crawl through. Sullivan went first, pushing the rifle ahead of him, with Scout bringing up the rear. Behind them, flashlight beams played across the platform as the tactical teams converged on their position. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, the air growing thicker and warmer. Sullivan's combat-trained senses told him they were moving toward the building's heating system. The heat would play havoc with thermal imaging, make them harder to track. Finally, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Ancient boilers lined the walls. their massive forms creating a maze of shadows. Steam hissed from old pipes, filling the air with a warm mist. Scout moved cautiously forward, his nose working through the complicated air currents. Sullivan checked. His captured rifle, half a magazine left. Not much, but enough to keep the tactical teams cautious. His military training had taught him that sometimes the threat of resistance was as effective as resistance itself. Scout suddenly stiffened, his head turning toward a dark corner of the chamber. Sullivan raised the rifle, but his partner's body. Language wasn't aggressive. The dog recognized whoever was there. Detective Sullivan, a familiar voice called softly. Over here, Officer Sarah Martinez stepped from the shadows, her weapon holstered in a gesture of trust. The evidence is safe, she said quickly. Judge Thompson and the others made it out, but we've got bigger problems. Sullivan lowered the rifle, letting Scout confirm Martinez's identity with a quick scent check. What kind of problems? The kind that come with presidential seals, she said grimly. FBI, Homeland Security, even some agencies I don't recognize. They're mobilizing all over the city. Someone really doesn't want that evidence getting out. Scout pressed against Sullivan's leg, sensing his tension. The scope of the conspiracy was expanding beyond anything they had imagined. This wasn't just about one corrupt department anymore. It was about control of law enforcement at every level. The sound of boots on metal walkways echoed through the chamber. The tactical teams were regrouping, preparing for another sweep. But now Sullivan understood. These weren't just mercenaries. They were government operators, working for someone with the power to command federal resources. How long until the evidence goes public? He asked Martinez. 3 hours, she replied, assuming the judge and Dr. Chen reached their contacts. Sullivan looked at his faithful partner, seeing his own determination reflected in Scout's steady gaze. 3 hours. They just had to stay alive, keep the tactical teams occupied for 3 more hours. The first flashlight beam cut through the steam, searching for targets. Scout's muscles tensed, ready for whatever came next. Sullivan gripped the rifle, his cuffed hands finding their strength in desperate necessity. The truth was out there now, racing through secure servers and hidden channels toward people who could expose it all. Their job was simple, but vital. Survive long enough for that truth to reach the light. As the tactical teams began their final hunt, Sullivan felt a fierce pride in his K9 partner. Together, they had uncovered a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of justice. Together, they would see it through to the end. The steam hissed, the shadows deepened, and the last stage of their fight for truth began. If this story of heroism and unbreakable loyalty moved you, don't miss what happens. Next, hit subscribe and the notification bell to follow Scout and Sullivan's fight for justice. Leave a comment sharing what touched you most about their journey. More incredible stories are on the way. Your support makes them possible.